Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Introduction to Shen-Hammer Pulse Diagnosis, Scaffolding to Pulse Diagnosis Competency with Dr. Karen Bilton. We're very delighted to have Dr. Karen Bilton with us for this 1 hour webinar and Q&A session afterward. Karen is also the co-author with Dr. Leon Hammer of Handbook of Contemporary Chinese Pulse Diagnosis. We are very excited to learn from her today. I'll hand it over to Dr. Karen.
Okay, so hi everybody. This lecture is an introduction to Shen-Hammer pulse diagnosis, and I do it in two parts. And this is the part one where I'm just introducing the system and giving people an idea as to the steps that you can take to become competent with pulse diagnosis. You know, when I studied, I was given no pulse diagnosis, no classes at all. All the 28 qualities were written up on the board, and that was my training in pulse diagnosis. So I thought that there was more to that. And so I went on a quest to try and find out more about it, which led me to New York and Dr. Hammer. All right, so let me share my screen. Yeah. Okay, so look, let's dive into this. All right, so what we're going to talk about tonight is I'll give you a little bit of information about my background. We'll talk about why pulse diagnosis is important, and then how you can scaffold your learning, how you can sort of learn on a more basic level, and on that more basic level, you still get an incredible amount of information from your patient. And then when you become comfortable with that level, then you can add more on top. And then finally, you can add more again. Now, this is a lineage method. I'll go briefly into the lineage of this pulse diagnosis method. And then I'll talk very briefly about taking the pulse, about the specifications and the framework of the system, the large and small segments of the pulse, the principal and complementary positions, and I'll introduce the categories of pulse qualities and talk about how you can monitor the progression of physiological processes on the pulse. And then finally, I'll just outline the pathway to learning. Okay, so I started off with physiotherapy. That was my initial training, and then went on to study acupuncture and Chinese herbal medicine. Now, as I said, I was completely bewildered by pulse diagnosis, but thought there must have been something in it for it to have the big standing that it has in all of the texts, all of the ancient texts. So I moved to New York and was there for 15 years. I worked and practiced there. And during that time, I studied, I met Dr. Hammer and studied with Leon Hammer. I have a PhD in investigating the reliability of this method of pulse diagnosis. And as Jiaying mentioned, I'm co-author on the Handbook of Contemporary Chinese Pulse Diagnosis. And I've been teaching this method since 2003. And I've taught that in America, in China, Australia, and also in New Zealand. Now, one of the highlights of this, of my experience and journey with this method of pulse diagnosis, was actually taking the knowledge back to the people who are the current Ding, the current holders of the Ding knowledge, the Ding lineage. And this is Ding here. He's the current patriarch of that lineage. So I'll explain as we go how that came about. All right, so why pulse diagnosis? Now, pulse diagnosis, it really is the essence of our medicine. And even though it tells us about, just simple qi deficiency, blood deficiency, excess heat, qi stagnation, dampness, wind, all those types of things, but it tells us way more than that. It tells us everything about the person. Um, Everything that has happened to that person is recorded on the pulse, and it's a complete rendering of our existence. And on it is recorded our ancestorial energy, our inherited gene, and how our gestation was, how our entry into this current life was, how our birth process, and everything that has occurred since. So that we can all feel on the pulse, and that gives us a window into where we've come from, the stresses that the physiology has had to endure, and it gives us a good insight into what the future health pathways may hold. Like, what are the vulnerable systems for our clients? Now, importantly, too, when you feel the pulse and you become competent with pulse diagnosis, you have access to information that bypasses the person's consciousness and any sort of narratives they have established around certain parts of their lives. So this becomes really important when you're dealing with shock and trauma and psychological issues where people may be repressing something, they may not be aware of situations, they may be withholding information because it's too painful for them to recap. So if you have a window into that world, then it gives you an incredible amount of information about your patient. So when we're empowered with all this knowledge, and we when we add this knowledge to what we already know, like what the patients are telling us, what we get from eyes, what we get from abdominal palpation, from the tongue, when we put all of this information together, we really are considering the true energetic being of the person, and we can treat that person wholeheartedly and from a place of integrity. Now, the pulse tells us about the unfolding of yang and how the unfolding of yang occurs in a particular physiology. And with the pulse, it's as with that adage of Chinese medicine, as above, so below. So we've got the correspondence between the macrocosm and the microcosm. And when we look at the pulse positions in this system, like here we have the left wrist and the right wrist. And when we consider the pulse positions, and then when we look at this, I'm sure everybody's familiar with this diagram with we have the cycle of yang, where we have our birth of yang in water, we have increasing yang up through wood to its apex in fire, and then the declining yang and yang going into storage, and the growing yin through the metal phase back into water, with earth in the center supporting everything. Now we can see that this manifestation is replicated on the pulse, where on the left side of the pulse we have our kidney yin position as our principal position coming, and then we have our wood, our liver, and our fire, our heart. So the left side of the pulse gives us information about the yang of the system that's available to open up through that sort of tai yang, through that sort of phase of the yang cycle. And then on the left side, we have the lungs, which are metal, we have the earth, the spleen and stomach, and then we have returning to water in the kidney. On that right side of the pulse, we have we can see how things are descending in the body, how and the big descent in the body is through the digestive system. But we have the lungs descending fluids, and we have the digestive system descending, and everything going back to kidney yang. This is our kidney yang position. So you can see that that cycle of yang is replicated in this pulse system. Now, learning pulse diagnosis, it's akin to learning a language. Now, think about the pulse as a language that the body uses to transmit the messages of physiology. And just like learning a language, it takes time for fluency. But fluency comes in stages. So when you say, if you go on a holiday to a Spanish speaking place, say to Mexico, and you need to be able to just say, hello, how are you? My name is, well, what is your name? My name is, and I would like a taco. I'd like some beer. And where's the bathroom? All those sorts of really basic phrases that everybody learns. It does allow you to be able to interact and get around Mexico. And while you're doing that, you learn more, and you can then add to your vocabulary. So that's how you sort of build your language skills. And it's exactly the same for pulse diagnosis. All right, so the Shen-Hammer pulse method is a lineage method, and it's from the Manghe Ding lineage. Now, the Ding lineage comes from the Jiangsu province in China, sort of around the Shanghai area. And it actually, when I was in China last studying with Huang, we were at the Chinese Medicine University Museum, and there was a big section on the Dig lineage and Dingan Ren. And there's a few things that Huang does in his diagnostic process that Dr. Shen used to do, and that I'd been taught by Dr. Hammer. So I can see that the medicine that's coming out of that part of China was all very interconnected. So Dingan Ren, people would probably be aware of Dingan Ren because of his association with the Wenbing school, but he was a proponent of both Wenbing and Jingfeng formulas. And it's written in that museum which confirms what I'd been told, is that he would use classical formulas for the really sick people and the more modern formulas for people who weren't so sick. So Dingan Ren was he was the grandfather of the person who taught Dr. Shen. Ding Jiwan was Dr. Shen's instructor. This is Dr. Shen here, and Dr. Shen was Dr. Hammer's instructor. Now, the interesting thing about all of this is that this knowledge, Dr. Shen was the only person who survived the Second World War and all the upheaval that was happening in China at that part of the time. Dr. Shen was the only survivor that kept the knowledge alive from all of the Ding family. All of the people who had learned it were unfortunately met their demise in all the wars around that time. So Dr. Shen was evacuated to the United States by his sister, and he met Dr. Hammer in New York. Now, Dr. Hammer was he was a psychiatrist, a child psychiatrist, and he met Dr. Hammer in a friend's clinic. And Dr. Hammer was amazed by this guy's ability to diagnose, to the point where he would run medical tests to confirm what he was saying. And he said it was uncanny, his ability to be able to diagnose from the pulse. So this led Dr. Hammer to apprentice with Dr. Shen, and they spent 8 years in an apprenticeship, and then they had a close association for about close to 30 years. So Dr. Hammer's original study was in the United Kingdom with John Van Buren, and he already had that knowledge before he started studying with Dr. Shen. But after he had apprenticed with Dr. Shen, he stopped practicing Western medicine. He still maintained his medical license because he needed that for practicing, but he practiced solely Chinese medicine. And Dr. Hammer taught the pulse method to several direct inheritors, such as myself. Now, the specifications of the system. Now, they had like an approximate 30-year association, and during this time, they documented the pulse system. And it's documented in the top book on the right, Chinese Pulse Diagnosis, a Contemporary Approach. This is an 800-page book. It's an amazing reference book for this system. Now, the method is really systematic and structured. That was what actually drew me to the system. Like I studied with Jeffrey Yuan. I studied with several people in New York at the time who were there. And this really presented to me pulse diagnosis in a really structured way, because I could say to Dr. Hammer or the people who were teaching for him at that time, why did you prescribe that formula? How did you get that diagnosis? And they would say, because of this quality or this combination of qualities in this depth combined with these qualities in this position. There was always something that was really that there was something substantial as to why they were prescribing or doing whatever treatment they were implementing. So as I said, you can use it on a basic level, like those initial Spanish phrases, but it provides a framework for people to grow their pulse skills and to improve their fluency. So the basic configuration is that of 3 depths, and we have the chi, blood, and organ depth. And these 3 depths are palpated on the large segment of the pulse. And that's where we're feeling the entire pulse. We're sitting opposite the patient and we're feeling both wrists at the same time. And we're palpating, first of all, the chi, then the blood, then the organ depth. And that gives us our first level of information. And they're our sort of our starting phrases. Then we feel the small segment, which is the individual positions. And this is where we make our way up and down the wrist, feeling the principal positions, and then also rolling our fingers to all of the complementary positions, which I'll go into in a little bit. The pulse quality descriptions are based on the sensation at the fingertips. So even though there are a lot of the classical qualities involved in this system, there's actually way more to feel on pulses than just 28 qualities. So I think probably if you're wanting to take information away from this particular lecture, I think the easiest way to think about it is the hard pulses, the ones that feel hard to the touch, they give us information about heat consuming fluids. If they're hard and smooth, there's no irregularities, there's no roughness to them, no choppiness, no vibrations. So there we know that it's sort of some sort of stagnation and heat that eventually starts to consume fluids. If we have like if we're feeling it feels hard to the touch, but it feels uneven, there's some sort of vibration or choppiness underneath the fingers, then that gives us an indication of irregular circulation. Now, if we feel the pulse and it feels soft and it hasn't got that hardness, well, that's a sign of some sort of qi deficiency, some sort of qi yang deficiency and sort of fluid excess. So just remember that hard and soft. It's just an easy thing to sort of point you in the right direction with pulses. And interpretations are provided for the pulse qualities based on the degree to which they're felt and where the qualities are actually found. So different qualities have different implications in different positions. For example, if you're feeling the choppy quality in a proximal position in a woman who's of childbearing age, then it might just be that woman is having a period. if you feel a choppy quality in the left distal position or the left sun, then we know that that's relates to the heart, and that is not a great quality to be feeling in that left distal position. So you can see that, depending on what you find where, there's different implications. Okay, so with taking the pulse, there's a couple of really Pulse 101 things that you need to be on top of to really to feel the pulse and get the proper information from the pulse. So the first thing is you've got to have your fingers in the right position. So in this system, we reference our fingers by the scaphoid, and then we lie our fingers down along the path of the impulse. We don't reference via the radial styloid, so it's via the scaphoid. Now, the other important thing is you must be on top of the main impulse when you're feeling a pulse. So you've got to have a feel around and feel for the trajectory. Because some pulses start laterally and come right medially, sort of under the tendon. Others do the converse. They can start more medially and come more laterally. Others can run straight up the middle. They can be really medial. So you just need to make sure that your fingers are on top of, all three fingers are on top of the main impulse. If you've got one that starts more laterally and runs more medially, you've got to make sure that that ring finger's on that proximal position. If you're just having it straight up and down, you might actually just miss the proximal position. Now, another really important part of pulse diagnosis is the chi depth is at a fixed location, and it's not always where the impulse is first felt. So if this is our chi depth, we can see that the normal impulse rises from the organ depth up through the blood depth to the chi depth, has a nice apex, and then comes back down. So this is our normal pulse form. Now, if, for example, we're feeling the pulse and we've felt down through the skin and we feel something up here, so we feel the impulse way up here, then that shouldn't be there. So that's giving us information that there's too much activity, too much yang, too much fire, however you want to think about it. So we know that that's a condition of excess, okay, if we've got something way above the chi depth. If we have an impulse that's not making it up to the chi depth, if we get our fingers to where the chi depth is and we don't feel anything, and we're not really feeling something until somewhere down here, then we know that that's a situation of chi deficiency or chi yang deficiency, because there's not the energy to carry the wave to the chi depth. So it's important to be aware of that, and we spend an awful lot of time in the class calibrating for the chi depth, because you need to be able to go into any patient and be able to confidently find where the chi depth is. And it's particularly hard on the people who are either above the chi depth or below the chi depth. But throughout the 4-day foundations class, we calibrate and recalibrate and recalibrate. So we sit with, I sit, or my teaching assistant sits on one side of a patient or a student, and another student feels the other side, and then we calibrate, we get the person to the right depth. So throughout those 4 days, we make sure that people are able to consistently find the chi depth, because everything is referenced from that chi depth. Now, the large segment, this is where we're feeling the entire pulse. And I would say probably about a good 80% of information comes from these first 10 minutes of feeling the pulse. And what we're doing what we're feeling with the large segment is we're counting the rate for 60 seconds so that we're not counting it according to breath, we count it for 60 seconds. And we're checking for an age appropriate rate, like Dr. Shen's age appropriate was between 72 to 78 beats a minute for a healthy adult. And while we're counting, we're feeling for any sort of arrhythmias. Is the pulse speeding up? Is it slowing down? Is it skipping beats? So the rate and rhythm give us an awful lot of information about the state of the heart and circulation. Now, we also have the waveform. Now, the waveform, it describes how the impulse arrives at and leaves your finger. And that also gives us a lot of information. I'll go briefly into some of these things as we continue through the talk. We also have the sides comparison. So we've got the left side, which is sort of our inherited energy, our organ system. We've got the right side, which is our digestive system. And I was speaking about that previously as sort of the ascent and the descent. So that gives us information about, is the strength with digestion? Is it an inherited strength? And that allows you to gauge how hard you're going to have to work to help people, and gives you an idea with prognosis. And Dr. Shen always used to say, it doesn't really matter how, ideally you want both sides to be up, to be equal and at the chi depth. But if you've got the strength in the digestive system, you've got the ability to heal, and you can heal through digestion. So it's always good to have that right side with a nice strong impulse. Now, we also palpate the three depths, the chi, blood, and organ depth. And here we're palpating just for the uniform qualities that we feel at each of those depths. Now, the small segment. Now, here we have the individual positions. They are the 6 principal positions and the 22 complementary positions. So with the principal positions, we've got our Sun, Guan, and Che positions. That's for our conversational fluency. And then when you can incorporate the information from the large segment, the information from the 6 principal positions, and then when you can feel all the complementary positions and add that information into your diagnostic process and understanding how that yang is unfolding in the patient. Is it going out and up too much? Is it too deficient and going up? So it allows you to really, when you are using all the large segment to its fullest extent and the small segment, you have an incredible amount of information as to how that process of yang unfolds in a person. Okay, so this just gives you, this just gives you an idea of the pulse form that we fill out. So what you can see, this red square at the top is everything that we feel with the large segment. So what we have is our rates, our beginning and end rate, and our rate with exertion and change with exertion. Here we have our first impressions, where we just sort of are saying, is the pulse thin? Is it tense? Is it diminished? Is it deep? And over here we have our depths. And here we're recording everything about sort of are we feeling a floating quality? Is there anything above the chi depth? Here we've got our chi depth, our blood depth. And don't worry about these, just the organ blood and organ substance. We talk about that in the higher levels of the pulse diagnosis. For this stage of learning, it's just suffice to think that those 3 depths, the organ depth is 1. And then we've got our, here on the left side of the form, we have our principal positions, where we've got the heart and the lung and the liver and the spleen and stomach and the kidney yin and kidney yang. And here we have all of the complementary positions. So we've got the lung complementary positions, the heart complementary positions, the diaphragm, the liver, the digestive system, complementary positions, and the pelvic lower body. With the large segment, the rate and rhythm is really important, and it gives us a lot of information about the heart and circulation. So as I said previously, like an adult, 18 to 50 years, the normal rate should be somewhere between 72 to 78 beats a minute without arrhythmias. Now, if you have a faster rate than this, then we know that there's increased circulation, that there's some processes happening that is causing the heart to beat faster than it should be. Now, Dr. Hammer and Dr. Shen speak a lot about heart shock and the effect of trauma to our physiology. And more often than not, a faster rate is a result of sort of a current heart shock. It can also be a result of, sort of fevers and fire and hot conditions. But in the absence of that, then we're looking at some sort of trauma. The slower rates indicate a decreased circulation. And the slower rates could be a yang deficiency, like a very deficient circulation, or it can be the long-term effect of past shock, where you have a heart that's beating fast. If you have a shock to the system that occurs in somebody who's vulnerable, an adult who has very weak chi and weak substances, or in a child, where children are very vulnerable while children are growing and while physiology is changing. Things that happen in childhood have a profound effect on physiology. So you can have people who have some sort of shock or trauma that happened in childhood, and they get that elevated heart rate that is happening for many years, because in an adult we have the self-regulating mechanisms, where under shock, under a traumatic episode, say if we're in a car accident, we run up the back of somebody, our heart starts beating, but then everything self-regulates, and several hours after, our heart has returned to normal, and supposing it wasn't too much of a shock, our physiology just resumes. In the case of a child, if there is a situation of some traumatic episode, then the heart hasn't got that ability to rectify itself. So you can have high heart rates beating for many, many years. And during this time, the qi and yang of the heart are worn out. So you actually get a heart rate that's falling. So a heart rate that is sort of in the 50s, 40s, 50s, and that's sort of a sign of profound heart qi yang deficiency. Now, when we come to our arrhythmias, we can have either a change of rate at rest, where the pulse is sort of speeding up and slowing down, where it's like, instead of just a nice constant beat, it's speeding up and then slowing down. So that's a sign of different degrees of heart qi yang deficiency. Also with skip beats. Now, if it depends on the degree of change and how often the change occurs, as to the degree of the heart qi yang deficiency. And we always correlate our findings with the age with the age of the person, to get an idea of the severity. So if we have somebody who's 30 and has a resting heart rate of 55, in the absence of being an elite athlete, then we're asking ourselves, what has happened to this young person to have this resting heart rate that's so low. So we can then infer that there's a possibility that something traumatic has happened to that person when their physiology was very young and still developing. Now, that trauma could be, it could be some sort of physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. It could be some sort of a baby dropped on its head. It can manifest in many different ways. It can also manifest as young people who overexercise before their energy is completely mature. All right, now when I was talking about the depths, I was saying that we have 3 depths that we palpate. Now, in this system, there are actually 8 depths. We've got this area above the chi depth that we feel that you shouldn't normally feel anything there. Then we've got our chi depth and our blood depth. And then we've got 3 depths to the organ depth. Now, these areas, the lower part of or the deeper part of the organ depth gives us information about kind of retained pathogens, latent sort of pathogens. And down here we have our firm and hidden depths. Now, the firm and hidden depths are only, we only say they're present if there's nothing above, okay? If there's no chi, blood, organ depth, and we're only feeling the impulse down here, then that's a sign of sort of profound deficiency or cold, sort of hypothermia type situation. So as I said, for the most part, we're just feeling the chi, blood, and organ depth. So as we push down through the depths, as we push down through the chi depth to the blood depth to the organ depth, we should get increasing activity, increasing substance. That as we press down, there should be the impulse should be feeling like there's more to it as we go down through the depths. Now, that is important because actually I'll talk about that when we talk about the blood depth. So let's just take the chi depth, for example. So if we have the impulse at the chi depth, so we know that that is telling us a lot about the patient. And I always like to remind people that we're feeling the pulse of a person. So we're not just identifying chi and blood and yin and yang. We're feeling the pulse of a person. So if that impulse is at the chi depth and the pulse has a normal buoyancy, then we know that that person is living life with vitality. They've got a resilience. They can sort of, when there's a stress to the system, they can kind of roll with the punches and then recover. So that's giving us a good information about the person. If we're feeling an impulse that's at the chi depth and it's got those hard qualities, then we know that like the tense, the tight, they feel hard. Then we know that that person is responds to life from a place of reaction, like their nervous system is on. They're acting from their wood. They're in a responsive stage. So we know that that person, like with the really hard chi depth, we can predict how they're going to respond, because there's going to be inflexibility and it's going to be that reactive. Now, if their chi depth is too soft and has, sort of the diffuse, reduced pounding, or even sort of a little bit diminished, then we know that that person is probably a little bit too compliant, just doesn't have the energy to completely, to have all the resilience that we spoke about initially. Now, if we have vibrations, if we have sort of smooth vibrations, rough vibrations, then that's giving us information about worry and past trauma. Now, if we have an impulse that rises above the chi depth, then we know that we're talking about conditions of excess and heat. And we're talking about our Tai Yang conformation too, if there's sort of the floating quality. So when we have that impulse, we know that, Tai Yang might be out there protecting the person, and Tai Yang protects the person not just from wind heat and from wind cold, it's our environmental protection. So people can be living life, if they're in a hostile environment, they can put, or they have to put their energy out there to protect themselves. So your floating pulse is an indication of some sort of Tai Yang activity, or a big waveform is some sort of excess in heat. Now, if the impulse does not come up to the chi depth, then we know that this person has chi deficiency and they're tired and they're not engaged or living their life with the vigor that they probably wish they were able to. Now, the blood depth, it gives us an indication of the systemic blood in a person's resources, whereas the chi depth was telling us about the chi and how the person reaches out to the world. The blood depth now is telling us about the actual resources for the person to support their being. So when we palpate, as I was saying before, we palpate on the way down through the chi, blood, and organ depth, and we should on the way down have increasing activity as we go down through the depths. Now we also palpate and we let the blood depth, we palpate leaving the organ depth up through the blood depth to the chi depth. And as we come up, we should have that converse sort of situation of the impulse coming under our fingers and there being less activity as we go up through the depths. If we're finding that when we come off that organ depth and we release our fingers and the impulse kind of goes beyond our fingers, then we say that there's some sort of stagnation in the blood vessels, like the blood is not flowing as freely in the vessels as it could. Now, the organ depth tells us about the state of the yin organs or the person's foundation, and just the main question for physiology: is there enough yang to maintain normal physiology? All right, now the pulse waveform, this is the big message from the pulse. So we've already spoken about the normal waveform. Okay, so that's normal activity. Somebody who is engaged with their life, reaches out to the world and is living life with vitality. Now, the hesitant waveform, here we have the impulse coming up to the chi depth, but instead of having that nice sort of apex at the chi depth, we kind of feel this sensation that the impulse hits all of our fingers at the same time. Now, this is our sign of sort of a hyperactivity material fire or a heart yin deficiency. Dr. Shen used to talk about this as the person, this this waveform presents itself in people who push themselves mentally. People who are working on computers or studying, these people are working too hard mentally. Now, if we take a look at this guy over here, this is our flooding deficient waveform, where the pulse doesn't make it all the way up to the chi depth. It hasn't got the energy to get it all the way up there, and it also hasn't got the energy to carry through. Okay, so this is our flooding deficient waveform. So this is what Dr. Shen used to talk about: somebody who's working beyond their physical capability, somebody who's working too hard physically, the physical push pulse. Now, this is the hollow full overflowing waveform, comes way up above the chi depth, and it has a big bounding quality to it. So it's like a big arrival and a big finish from your fingers. Now, this is a sign of chronic heat in the blood. Now, this is where the body is trying to keep the heat that's being generated by the system, keeping it away from the vital organs and taking it into the blood just to try and maintain homeostasis. Now, we know that with the hollow full overflowing wave, it generally comes with tension. This is our sort of our hypertensive type of pulse. And this is the pulse where, people need to discharge a little bit of that pressure, a little bit of that heat. So, these are the people who might have angry outbursts. Now, this is our flooding excess, which is a sign where it comes right up above the chi depth. And then again, the waveform doesn't follow through in the same way as the hollow full overflowing. It comes down. So this is a sign of an acute heat, acute infection. So this is one of the least common, this is probably the least common waveform. The suppressed waveform, it's beyond the scope of this lecture to go into it too much, but this is our sign of somebody who's on all the heart medications where circulation is impeded by synthetic particles. And it's there's hardly any pounding at the top, what we call reduced pounding, and it's got a flattened apex. And then when you make your way down through the wave to the organ depth, then there's all this robust pounding that kind of feels out of character compared with what there was at the top of the pulse. So you can see that the waveform also gives us an awful lot of information regarding the state of the yang qi and substances of the body, but also the gesture of this wave informs us about the expression of that actual physiology into the life of the person. And so by identifying the wave, we already know a lot about the person. So you can see that from that large segment, we get, you take all of those things that I've just spoken about into your diagnostic picture, we already have a lot of information. And that's just from the first sitting opposite them, just feeling, not even down to the principal positions yet. Now, the principal positions are the conversational fluency. Now, in this pulse system, we have the upper burner, the sun positions, the distal positions are the left is the heart, the right is the lung. In the middle positions, we have on the left side the liver and on the right side the stomach and spleen. And in the proximal positions or the Chur positions, we have the kidney yin on the left and the kidney yang on the right. Now, as you can see, that these pulse positions, as they are in the Su-Wen, so we have all the organs of the upper burner are in the distal positions. The middle burner organs are in the middle positions, and the lower burner organs are in the proximal positions. So that gives us an idea. That allows us to also assess what's happening in the sort of across the triple burner. So if we're looking at the distal positions, the Chur positions, that when again we're looking at the person, that gives us information about the awareness with which the world is experienced. The strength of the communication from the fire element, from the heart, and the capacity of the system to handle shock and to recover from grief from the lung. And if you have somebody who has deep absent upper burners, as is the situation with often with cesarean sections, then we know that person, that upper burner just hasn't got the chi and the available resources to handle shock and handle grief. The middle burner, so that tells us about how centered the person is in their life, and it tells us how the physiology is able to deal with stress and toxicity. And it also tells us on how just the recovery on a day-to-day basis with how the state of the liver, how that liver is able to regenerate and sort of allow the energy to come back into the system, and also how the body is able to replenish that energy through the digestive system over time. Now, the lower burners, they give us information about the ground on which we stand. It's like our constitutional energy and our capacity to heal. So if we have, deep absent pulse qualities in a young person, then we're beginning to think that this is probably a Jing deficiency, because somebody who is young, somebody who's in their 20s with deep and absent proximal or chur positions, then they haven't had either they have led an incredibly overwork and stressful life, or they entered the world, which is most probably the case, with less. Now, the complementary positions, once you start adding in the information from the complementary positions, and we're at complete fluency. So these are accessed by rolling the fingers. Some are found on the main vessel or on branches of the artery, but like, for example, if we're rolling our fingers down like this, then we're feeling the gallbladder position. And if we're feeling rolling up like this, then we're feeling the large intestine, and it's a small intestine on this side. So we roll our fingers to access the complementary positions, and they give us information about the yang organs, but also areas of the body. And one of another strength of this system is the diaphragm positions, where we roll our fingers between the distal position and the middle position, and we feel what's happening between them. If there's any sort of elevation, then that gives us a really good idea as to how the up and down movement is in the body and which organs we need to work with to rectify that if we're finding a positive reading. Okay, so I'll just introduce the pulse qualities really briefly. It's way beyond the scope of this lecture to go into this too much, but I'll just break down the pulse qualities, how they are presented in the textbooks, the handbooks, and the big pulse book. So when we talk about volume, we have robust volume and reduced volume. So our robust volume qualities, they give us information of excess and heat. So our hollow flow overflowing waveform that I spoke about before, this is one of our robust volume, where we've got the body is clearly telling us that there's sort of that chronic heat in the blood. Another example of a robust volume impulse is robust pounding, where that impulse is hitting your fingers with force. Now, the reduced volume qualities, these tell us about conditions of qi deficiency, yang deficiency, and cold. So we've got our flooding deficient waveform. Another manifestation or another quality is our qi depth absent. And we can have our deep quality, where we've lost our qi depth, our blood depth, and we only feel a sensation at the organ depth. Now, the width of the pulse, that gives us information about the condition of the blood. And we have when we're palpating on the way down, we have that thin quality. But remember I said that we also palpate the blood depth raising up from the blood to the organ depth. That gives us information about excess in the blood. Now, the depth gives us information about the location and chronicity of diseases. So if clearly pulses that are floating and are more superficial, they give us information about, things to do with the Wei Qi and situations, more acute situations. If we're looking at all the deeper qualities, then we know that we're talking about more chronic conditions. But there's also the aspect of how deep a quality goes into the pulse gives you an idea as to how long a situation has been present. So if you have a chi depth that's a little bit thin, and you get to the blood depth and the organ depth, and there's nice volume, there's nice width, and that thinness is sort of gone by the blood depth and further down. So we know that there is a small amount of blood deficiency, but it hasn't been there for that long. If we are feeling the chi depth is really thin, the blood depth is really thin, and that thinness all the way down to the organ depth, then we know that we're dealing with a situation that has been with this person for a long time, where that thinness has made its way to the deepest depths of the pulse. Now the length tells us a short pulse. Now that's when we're feeling with all 6 fingers sitting opposite the person. A short pulse, we're not really feeling anything under these fingers. So we're feeling everything under this part. Now, that can either be a situation of profound stagnation of the middle heater, or it can be profound deficiency of the upper and lower heater. Now, if we have a long pulse, so that's when we feel the impulse way beyond our fingers. In the absence of any pulse qualities that give us information about heat, like our robust pounding, our tense, then we know that that long impulse tells us that that person has strong chi. Now, under the shape category, we've got our fluid pulse quality, which is our slippery quality. It feels soft, and with the slippery quality, like normally the impulse kind of hits our finger like so, comes straight up from below. With the slippery quality, we have this sensation of the impulse sliding under our finger. Now, in this pulse system, all we know is with the slippery quality is that there's some sort of turbulence to the flow. Now, that turbulence to the flow could be from excess fluids, it could be from heat in the blood. We don't know, like in this system, a slippery quality isn't spleen chi deficiency with excess fluids. So it depends. Often, a real slippery quality can be felt in the blood depth with a high degree of heat in the blood. Now, our non-fluid, these are our hard pulses. And our hard, even pulses, they give us information about chi stagnation, developing heat, consuming fluids. So Dr. Hammer likened that to the strings of a musical instrument, where we have the taut pulse, which is chi stagnation. Our tense pulse, we've got increasing tension and decreasing diameter. Now we're starting to get like an excess heat. And then we get to our tight pulse, where the heat is starting to vulcanize the fluids. And the tight pulse has got less diameter than the tense and is harder. And then we get the wiry pulse that feels like a wire. And this is when we're getting into our yin essence deficiency. And we have our uneven hard pulses. And these give us information about the fluidity of the circulation of chi and blood. So the one that we're all familiar with is the choppy quality, where you've got that really serrated, grating sensation that gives us information about blood stagnation in the tissues. And then we've got our vibrations, our smooth vibration and our rough vibration. So these give us information that circulation is not smooth, and that we need to rectify that. Now, a really important or a really useful tool of this pulse system is you can track the progression of physiological processes through pulse qualities. So we've got sort of our chi deficiency, our reduced volume qualities that go from chi deficiency all the way to extreme yang deficiency. We've got our heat in the blood, we've got our chi stagnation. I'll talk briefly about the empty. But in terms of the reduced volume, the heat in the blood, and the chi stagnation, now we correlate these with the age of the patient. Okay, so the age of 40, up until the age of 40, the physiology is strong. It has an ability to be able to replace and replenish. The further, like clearly, the further you are away from 40, like a 20-year-old is that ability is stronger than it is in a 39-year-old. But still, up to the age of 40, the body is able to repair and reproduce and replace. Once you get from beyond 40, between 40 and 50, the body can kind of maintain things. And then after you get beyond 50, then any working outside of what resources are available means that you're actually just taking from the bank. Now, if we look at these, this is where the progressions become really interesting and helpful prognostically, and also to give an idea to your patient of how hard you have to work. So if we have our mild chi deficiency, which is where we're just starting to lose a little bit of buoyancy in our chi depth, then we start to get our chi depth diminished, where we don't feel it with full impulse up at the chi depth, and then we get our chi depth absent. So these are all mild chi deficiencies. And Dr. Shen used to say, in somebody who is young, like somebody who's 20 years old, they should be able to go and get a few good nights sleep, eat well. They should be able to bring back their chi depth. Somebody who's a little bit older, like somebody who's a 65-year-old, you might have to work, 70, 80-year-old, you might have to work harder to bring back a chi depth, or you will definitely have to work harder. And here we're getting onto our more moderate, now we've lost our chi depth, we're losing our blood depth. Now chi and blood depth have gone, we've only got our organ depth and our deep quality. And here we have our absent pulse, where all of those depths are now not felt. So if we're feeling the deep or the absent quality in somebody who's young, then we're thinking, what on earth have they done to wear out all of their chi in this short amount of time? So we're asking ourselves, is it a crazy lifestyle, or is it an inherited deficiency? But if it is sort of lifestyle issues, and we do also know in that 20-year-old that you can bring back pulses incredibly when you're working with that young, vibrant energy. If you've got a deep quality in somebody who's 80, then it's not as diagnostically significant because they've had that 80 years to wear out their chi, and they've earned this deep quality. And, you're probably not expecting with treatment to bring back all of the depths. You might be able to get more vigor into it, maybe get a bit of a blood depth back, but you're not going to be able to work with the energy in the same way you can as a 20-year-old. Okay, so this is also the heat in the blood that I was talking about. So normally when we release from the chi depth up through the blood depth to the from the organ depth up through the blood depth to the chi depth, we get the impulse should sort of come under our fingers, as it does in that diagram. So we're here, and then the impulse kind of comes under like so. If we get this situation where we don't get it coming under our fingers, this is what Dr. Shen called blood unclear, blood heat, and blood thick. So this is when we release off that organ depth, and then we just get the impulse filling out under our fingers the whole way up. So this is a sign. These are all different signs of stagnation of blood in the blood vessels. And this is, when we've got our lipids circulating, this often found with a hollow flow overflowing pulse. This is sort of our getting onto our cardiovascular disease situation. Now, once again, if we've got blood thick or blood unclear in somebody who's really young in their 20s, then we know that that's a really profound situation. It would be unusual to have this, but a high degree of blood heat in somebody who's very young is, you definitely need to take care of that very quickly. And in terms of chi stagnation, again, if we're getting our tight quality in somebody who's young, like it's not so much of an issue in somebody who's had, you know, their entire lifetime to wear out their yin essence. But if we're getting this, tight quality in a 20-year-old, it's like, what have they done? Or did they enter the world with this sort of yin essence deficiency? Now, the empty quality. Now, this is where pulse diagnosis becomes really, really helpful. This quality, where you can see the arrows separating. Now, what that feels like, under normal circumstances, the impulse should be hitting your finger like this. Now, when you get to that depth, if you don't feel anything under here and you feel something kind of at the side of your fingers, but nothing under here, then we say that that depth is separating. Now, the empty quality in this system is when we feel something at the chi depth, but below it there's no blood depth and no organ depth. Now, pulse diagnosis should make sense. So in terms of, if we just cast our eyes back to here, we can see that here where our chi depth is losing its buoyancy, it's kind of breaking up a bit, it's gone. Then we're losing our blood depth. We've only got our organ depth, and then we've got nothing. So this is a physiologically normal way of wearing out our yang, okay, wearing out our energy. There's no physiological process that can explain, or normal physiological process that can explain a chi depth that is present without a blood and organ depth below it. So this is actually our pulse quality that indicates a separation of yin and yang. So you've got sort of the yin is not strong enough to anchor the yang, or the yang is so deficient that it floats up. However you want to think about it, you get that separation. Now, this is a sign of, the system is very vulnerable. So if we, with our pulse diagnosis, can pick this up when the organ depth is just beginning to separate, before we get to this this true empty where we're just feeling the chi depth, you can actually work with this, and you can bring back a separating organ depth without too much trouble. But once we're here, you've got to work a whole lot harder. If at all, you can bring it back. So as you can see, like the pulse qualities, once you have an understanding of the system, you can see the progression through which pulse qualities go and how they describe the physiological processes in the body. Okay, so that's all I'm going to present in terms of information about the pulse system, but I'll just talk briefly about the pathway to learning. So we have a 4-day foundations class, and it's at least 50% hands-on. We're calibrating depths throughout the class, and we present the whole system. We present the depths, the waveforms, all the principal and complementary pulse positions, all the pulse qualities. You are given the skills to be able to complete an entire pulse evaluation, and you're provided with that scaffolding to grow your learning. And we talk about other concepts, such as we go into like heart shock and trauma and toxicity, and we talk a bit about Dr. Shen's systems, which are quite helpful. And we go through a case study. Now, I treat predominantly with classical formulas, so I've been relating a lot of this pulse system to classical formulas. So and in terms of we give acupuncture and formulas for different situations as well. The intermediate classes, we have day one, these are 2-day classes. Day one is review, where we have a bit of we have a classroom situation where we do a bit of didactic learning, and then we get our hands on pulses and calibrate, try and clear up what we can. And then day two, it's just seeing patients, where I fill out the pulse form of 3 patients in the morning, and then in pairs, people go through and find all the pulse qualities on those patients. And then in the afternoon, we do a workup of each of those patients, and together we come up with a treatment plan, a management plan. And the intermediate classes is 2 days of just seeing patients. And to support learning along the way, we also have Zoom pulse meetups like every 6 to 8 weeks. And we're hoping to get a Melbourne Foundations class. So China Books is going to be running that, and it will be on Thursday to Sunday, October 1 to 4. And here are the QR codes. We've got a QR code for practitioners that can take you to the registration page, and also we have the QR code for students. Now, if you have any questions, you can contact Jia Ying at info@chinabooks.com or call her. Yeah, so anyway, that is all I have to say. Are there any questions?
Oh, Sibyl is asking, is it possible for us to get a copy of the notes? Is that
Yeah,
okay?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Make sure that I'll make sure that I send you a copy of this slideshow.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mm,
And if people are interested, we can go through and do a part 2 where I talk a little bit more about the sides of the pulse, and we go through a case.
yeah,
So we
definitely.
can sort that out as well. And that gives you an idea as to, how you can use the pulse system, and yeah, like it has helped my Chinese medicine incredibly.
Mm,
And, as I said, studying with Huang Huang more recently, I can just see how Huang Huang's use of the abdomen is sort of paralleled in the pulse. If you kind of hold your hands like this next to the abdomen, like it's all one thing leads to the other, and they all replicate each other, and it's just amazing. And seeing working with Huang Huang, it was the first time I've ever come across anybody else who looks at the inner lower eyelid. Dr. Shen used to do that, and I've been doing that, and it was the first time I've ever seen anybody else do it. So then it's like, oh, this must be like the Jiangsu Meng He sort of medicine. So anyway, I love it. It's great.
Oh, wait, there's a question here by Jody.
Uh,
Can you read the questions?
yeah. Well, at this time, we're just starting with those October dates. I think Jody and Jia Ying are probably best to discuss that. Like I'm happy. I'm just in Sydney. I'm not far away. So if there is the need, and um if we have enough people interested, I'm happy to travel down to study or to teach. And it's important too, I must say, that to follow through. Like if we get a foundations class going, we've got to at least do some review days where I come back down to Melbourne, and so people can get their hands on, and just have that hands-on review and touch base.
I think you have the workshop in Sydney as well. Is that
Where we've got one, it's tentatively it's tentatively for the end of June.
end of June? Okay.
Yeah. So um, if that's of interest to people. Although we might have to change that to July, but anyway, that's another story. Any other questions? Was that clear? Were people able to follow it?
It's very clear for me. Yes. A lot of information to take in, but it's very clear.
Yeah, it is a lot of information. Yeah. But I can't recommend enough um, being able to learn pulse diagnosis has helped so much. But I also want to stress I never use pulse diagnosis away from other diagnostic techniques, but it does allow you, especially like when you're looking at things moving up and down the body, it's like it really allows you to get in and see where the problems are and what you have to work with. And it really does. It's a really detailed, infinite way of sort of rating somebody's physiology that is paralleled by all the presentations in the Shen-Hammer. So
Mm,
I think it is a big pulse system, but it's there for a reason.
yes. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, it's 8:20 now. So if no one has any questions, we can end our session here. And there will be a recording. We will send it out to everyone. And of course the slideshow, your notes. Yeah. And one last thing to mention, China Books is doing, we already started the end of financial year sale early this year, so you're welcome to put in your order to take advantage of the sale. Okay, thank you very much, Karen, for your time tonight and a
You're
very
welcome.
informative session.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, and have a good evening, everyone.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.